Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with another card and video. Today's card and video is a little bit different. I wanted to show some support, raise some awareness. There is a hashtag on social media, it's hashtag cards for Ukraine, where a lot of crafters are showing their support for what's going on right now. Members of our card making community, like Yana Smokula, who I've mentioned many times, she lives in the Ukraine and is literally going through it right now. So I will have more info in the description box below the video. I'll have a link to my blog post. I'm also going to link to, it's a global citizen post that they've vetted a bunch of charities that are legit. You could also, of course, donate to like the Red Cross, etc. So I'll have a link to that, and then we're just gonna see what happens. So for this card, I started with some Canson XL watercolor paper, and I die cut a whole bunch of pieces. You could spray or color your cardstock or paper however you want first, and then die cut. I just felt like die cutting first. It's kind of nice because the color will then saturate the edges as well. In the end, you do what works for you with things like this, like whether you want to do the cardstock, spray just pieces and then die cut. But yeah, I decided to make my life more difficult in a sense and die cut all these pieces. I used the Sunflower Petals wafer die, and I die cut a ton of petals. And to color them, I'm just using squeezed lemonade, mustard seed, and some wild honey distress spray stains. And then I set those aside to dry. The centers were cut from the same watercolor paper, and I used 3 different shades of brown for that too. I used Vintage Photo and gathered twigs and some ground espresso. Added a little bit of water too. And then same thing, all these pieces, like once I was happy with how they were looking, I just set them aside to dry. I'm working in my splat box. I have some paper towel in there just to help kind of soak up the excess, because I'm making a grand old mess while I'm coloring all these pieces. You could also die cut everything from color cardstock or do ink blending. Like, the sky's the limit with how you want to color your die cuts. I was just in a mood to use the sprays. So then the leaves are from the Detailed Rose wafer die. So I die cut 3 of the solids, 2 of the outlines. And I did kind of my fave combo of Twisted Citron and Rustic Wilderness, but I also added a bit of Crushed Olive Distress spray stain as well. And same thing, sprayed them and fiddled with it a bit, and then set everything aside to completely dry. So while those were drying, I die cut some smooth white cardstock with the Here For You wafer dies by CZ Design. And I left them in, or just one of them, the other ones it doesn't matter, but I left it in the cardstock rather than popping it out. It's so much easier to blend this way because the cardstock's holding everything in place, so I'm not having to fiddle, how it wants to move. And to blend on that, I'm using Prize Ribbon Distress Ink. The sunflower is the flower of the Ukraine, and then yellow and blue is the colors of their flag. So that was the reasoning behind what I'm using and creating for this card. So I did my blend on the sentiment and kept it more intense towards the bottom and kind of let it fade a little bit towards the top, just to give it that nice sort of ombre look. And then I popped everything out of the cardstock, and then I'm adhering the layers together with craft tacky glue so that I've got nice dimension and some, kind of weight to the sentiment, because it's just habit. I can't not have a sentiment that's not stacked unless I put an outline on it. This one does come with the outline, but I only wanted to use the words. So I stacked those together. And then by the time I had all that done, technically off camera, because I wasn't on the screen when I did this, because as usual, I wasn't paying attention, but I had stuck all of these pieces to the sticky side of just some painter's tape. So it held all my die cut pieces in place, and I had splattered them with water after they had mostly dried. So you get that fun distress look that has all of the, texture and everything. So then it's just a matter of adhering everything together. So I just went around with the larger part of the sunflower, like center, and then just adhered all these petals. And I adhered the lighter colored ones closer towards the center, and then I just kind of tucked in all those other ones and just built my sunflower. You can choose how many you want to use. I used quite a few on this. I lost count. I used them all anyway. And then I adhered the center with a good dollop of glue so that it kind of popped up a bit. And then I also die cut some smooth white cardstock with one of the nested domed arches wafer dies. And I ran that through my Spellbinders Platinum die cut machine. And when I'm using Simon's embossing folders, I use the platform, the folder with the cardstock in it, and 2 metal shims. So I run that through with the LUMEN embossing folder. So it's got that just gorgeous texture. So then I'm going to adhere my sunflower to this embossed arch, and then my leaves, just adhered all those pieces together, and then I'm just kind of tuck those under the sunflower while the glue is still wet. It's just sort of fiddling here. So once I've got everything in place, I ended up putting like acrylic blocks on top of this because, again, I got a lot of pieces and a lot of glue that just needs a few minutes to dry. So got everything adhered. And then I'm going to do a little zhuzhing. Rather than fiddle with any sort of foam tape, I just die cut scraps of cardstock. This is why I never get rid of any of my scraps, because they always come in handy. So I die cut scraps of cardstock with just the edges of that Here For You wafer die, because all the dimension of the sunflower is going to pop that up quite a bit. Part of it's going to be adhered on top. So rather than trying to add little thin bits of, foam tape behind those letters, it was so much easier to just die cut multiples from the scraps and then adhere those together, because they'll fit obviously perfectly right behind that sentiment. So I stacked those together with the craft tacky glue and then pop that into place behind the ends of this sentiment. And then I also stamped a companion sentiment from the CZ Design Well Wishes stamp set. So I've got another large scrap of cardstock. I used my anti-static powder tool. I inked up my sentiment with clear embossing ink and then stamped that onto the cardstock. And then I'm going to coat that with clear embossing powder. So it's definitely going to look like nothing, but there is a method to the madness. So coated that with the embossing powder, tapped off the excess. I'm going to melt that with my heat tool and just have to tilt it in the light to make sure it is smooth and melted. Once it's melted, I'm going to apply that Prize Ribbon Distress ink again heavily. So I'm just swirling my brush in there and, swirling it right on top of that sentiment. Because it was heat embossed, the heat embossing resists the ink, so it'll be legible. And then I wipe off any ink that's sitting on top of that sentiment. And then I'm going to trim this down with my little baby guillotine trimmer. This thing is so tiny. So yeah, trim it down with my paper trimmer. So I've got a nice little sentiment strip that matches everything else. So I'll trim that down. And then before I get to finishing the card front, I want to get the inside stamped. So I have my card base and I'm going to put up my Misty and I'm going to stamp it with more sentiments from that Well Wishes stamp set. So picked out a couple sentiments that just, again, it was just kind of meant to be. It felt like as I was making this, I looked at the set and I was like, this is just too perfect. So I inked up the Be Strong with Mustard Seed Distress Oxide ink, stamped that a couple times to get a good solid impression. And then cleaned that off, removed it, and added the second sentiment from the set and just fits in perfectly underneath. And that one I'm going to stamp with the Prize Ribbon Distress Oxide ink. Because when it comes to stamping, I prefer the oxide inks versus the regular distress ink because the pigments give you a more solid impression. So, Be Strong, You're in My Thoughts. Again, it just kind of worked. So after I had finished the inside of the card, I had put Big Mama foam tape on the back of that domed arch and then pop that into place on the card front. And then I'm going to adhere my die cut sentiment I'm going to put my craft tacky glue on there. The craft tacky glue I'm using today is the one that I have the little fine metal tip just screwed onto the end. I always link to this when I use it. It's linked right next to the craft tacky glue, because yeah, this is the one I use for when I'm doing more like detailed adhering, that sort of a thing. So put that into place, pop that sentiment onto there, and then the little sentiment strip I'm going to pop on with just some thin little foam tape strips from Doris. So pop the backing off that, stick that into place. This would be fine as is, but again, I have so much bling, I don't know what I will do with it all. And of course I had the perfect colors for this. So I had some yellow hearts, which were just perfect, and some blue azurite pearls from Studio Caudia, as well as some yellow luminous lemon pearls from Trinity Stamps. So I kind of fiddled around with my embellishments here just to get them where I wanted them, where I thought they looked best. And then I'm going to adhere these into place with the craft tacky glue. And then once these are adhered, this card is complete. So like I said earlier in the video, I will have a link below this video to my blog post. I'll have my pictures in my blog post, picture links to the supplies, everything. And then, yes, I will have a link to the Global Citizen post that has, I think, 10 or 20 different charities that are, like I said, vetted and legit ways to help. So I will have a link to that as well if you guys want to check that out. And then on social media, there's the hashtag cards for Ukraine, which is just getting filled with so much just inspiration and support, and hopefully even more ways to help. So you can check that out as well. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.